You know, I wasn't originally going to make a video about this series. I was going to watch it, of course, you know, it's a solid 8 hours to pass the time in a slightly slow second half of February this year. But after seeing how much everyone else has been up in arms, I thought I would contribute too, because I came into this series quite optimistic, I've got to admit. I mean, I think actually I was one of the early people that was hounding on how great this series could have been. I have an ancient old video talking about the murmurs of a live-action Netflix adaptation, and although Netflix live adaptations have had quite the memes about them over the years, I kind of thought they had a good chance, especially with the main creators on board, until they weren't anymore. And after seeing the success of One Piece, it really seemed like Netflix has just kind of worked it out. After video games have worked out how to step into movies, I thought maybe Netflix had worked out how to step into TV series, but apparently not. Kind of. So I came into this series with a big open mind. I knew that the creators had left the series because they were making changes, and I thought, well, maybe they're just sticklers for change. Maybe they didn't want anything to be adapted at all. A valid point, but it could be worked with. I heard the rumors about how Sokka's not going to have any of that sexism arc, and I thought, that's fine. That was like 3 episodes long anyway, that arc. It starts from the iceberg, it ends by Suki. Fine, whatever, as long as, say, the Master at the North Pole still has it, I'm happy as it is. I was even happy with the other additions as things went along, knowing by pure assumption that we get to see the Southern Air Temple bombarded with fire at the start. I thought that'd be great. It's a little bit of fan service to see a scene we didn't see before. And so I watched the first episode, and I'll be one to tell you, I actually kinda liked it. I knew it was different. I had a few ums and ahs everywhere, the main one of course being the fact that Aang can now suddenly fly, but hey, at least they called him Aang. The 2010 movie really puts the standards for this kind of saga on the basest level of the floor. But I thought, hey, if they're not really going to get around to Legend of Korra, we don't need to necessarily release ourselves from all earthly shackles and fly. It's fine. Plus, you can argue he's just puffing gusts of wind or whatever. Sure, okay. But as the episodes went on and we got further and further into the story, bigger, more extreme changes started to come in. One of the big changes that came in that I was actually on board with, and I actually spotted this when I was watching the trailer for it, I kind of wish I didn't look at it so slow, was the fact that Tio gets introduced a little bit earlier in the story at the same time as Omashu. Come round to episode, I think it is like 4 or something, and they combine the plot lines of King Bumi and Omashu, Jet and the Freedom Fighters, as well as Tio and the Mechanist all into one trio corner episode arc. And I, whoa, that's early. Please don't jump the gun on where technology's reached, please, series. But I got it. It made sense. It was a nice adaptation to speed things up, and there's some nice thematics that cross over between the 3 parties. I was like, okay, that's daring, but fine. You know, don't go too much further off the edge from that. However, as the series went on, I came to a slow burn of a realization that this Netflix Avatar series is just so very Netflix. It is so very corporate, you know? That's the best way to kind of summarize it into its smallest parts. When you have this surprise hit of a cartoon that's way beyond its usual audience demographic when it comes to the actual deep themes and story being told underneath, it's like an actual lightning in a bottle that Nickelodeon at the time clearly didn't understand, or recognize to certainly say the least. But with Netflix seemingly handling it and taking some pretty dark series of themselves, it seemed like the perfect actual hands to kind of make the best chance situation out of this. You know, they've certainly got a budget going on. But the end result is a series that's good, you know, it's fine. If you haven't seen the series before, or you're just, you know, a normie, you can watch this and say, hey, that looks pretty good. But the more you look into it, the more you compare it to the cartoon, and the more you realize it is so dumbed down, I guess is the best way to see it. Whilst the original Avatar The Last Airbender cartoon really sort of elevated his audience and put in way higher expectations than probably what was really deserved for us stupid teenagers at the time, what the Netflix series manages to do is treat its audience like dirt. It is so unwilling to add any kind of nuance or open-ended mystery in any regard that it just tells you everything immediately with no real satisfying form of storytelling. Now, I've seen some people argue that the fact that we see the Southern Air Temple taken down early does ruin the tension of the reveal of Monk Gyatso's corpse, and sure, you're right, but also I'll allow it. It's a bit of fan service to see on the side. But what really starts to bog you down is just how much exposition there is, dialogue that's unneededly just shoved into your face, and how there is never any mystery. Anytime a question is brought up, it's answered immediately. There are no small details to spot in the background, it's just so surface level in a lot of ways. I like to think I'm quite forgiving, especially in the early on elements of the series. I thought we don't have to, surf on the penguins or the giant fish. Yeah, it takes away a bit of Aang's characterization, but we're on a short runtime here, we gotta get moving. Although admittedly, I was disappointed we didn't see the foaming at the mouth guy, nor him spinning the two pebbles, but whatever. Whilst at the same time, there are moments where Netflix does choose to bring in the fan service. They have the My Cabbages guy, multiple times coming out about to say his line, and then he finally does. Woohoo, brilliant. You have the entire title sequence told by Gran Gran in episode 1, and it's really stilted and weird, but, a great fan service. I'll take it as fan service and say it's fine. It's weird, but it's fine. But the more you go into this series, the more you start to see where they've taken elements here and there, And what you'll come to see is there are all sorts of iconic elements that come later in the entire saga that are brought earlier for the sake of kind of just showing it off early and being like, hey, it's gonna get good. It's as if they followed so heavy-handedly on the idea that Book 2 and 3 are better than Book 1, or that the first 3 episodes have a way different tone to the rest of the series. So they thought, right, okay, let's get the entire tone of Season 2 and maybe even Book 3 over to Book 1 and cram it in wherever we can. And there are some pros to that, and there are some cons. It got to the point where I was genuinely worried that through several points of the series they were going to actually introduce Toph. Thankfully they didn't. They had a little bit of a good sense of hesitation. However, by the time you get to the final episode, you get to this final battle that we've already seen once in the cartoon, already saw as the finale to that god-awful 2010 movie that thankfully was at least over after 2 hours, and then for the third time we have to experience it again, and you can really see how much meddling was going on to make changes that weren't necessarily needed. For a start, this battle is just full-on foreshadowed early, with Kyoshi apparently in episode 2 saying, watch out, there's a super serious battle happening later if you don't get to action, which in its own line just makes me wonder, since when could the past avatars see the future now? It happens again later with Kuruk saying, you gotta get going, it's gonna be really important, it's like, what is this? This now starts to remove a whole element of free will if the avatars know what's going to happen to warn the current avatar what to avoid. That's already strange in its own regard. But then by the time we get to this finale sequence, there are all sorts of gaps that haven't come along the way. But one of the ones I think that is the most emblematic is the fact that Netflix has a direct disagreement with just leaning into any hint of artistic creativity. Because when the moonfish is killed in the original cartoon, all color wipes away for the cartoon, right? And it just becomes a grayscale, black and white world for a bit. And this is so artistic, especially in an animation form. The Netflix series cannot commit to this black and white aesthetic. In some places, it's nice. It's black and white with a splash of the fire making more reds. That's nice. But it's not just the fiery reds and yellows that come out, it's just color in general comes in whenever there's fire on set. You can see moments where Katara is in her blue cloak and it's just fully blue because there's fire going over her head. Even when it starts to go black and white in this sequence, it fades into black and white and then comes back out again, and then fades into it and then comes back out again, as if to say, oh, our audience would never watch a black and white story for 5 minutes, so no, we're going to keep dipping our toes in and out to keep everyone's retention times because our audience are literal babies and we need to force feed them any type of story for them to listen. It's so... I couldn't not feel so talked down to this entire series. And the expositing across the whole series never stops. Thank you for making it halfway through this video. If you haven't already, come subscribe, as we do reviews as well on anything new that releases. Usually animation. This one's kind of the middle ground. To be honest, the last time I made an Avatar video didn't do very well, so not expecting the most out of this. So if you are here, cheers. I really appreciate you. Give me your grumbles down below or suggest anything else you'd like us to cover. Otherwise, let's get back to it. When Aang turns into the ocean spirit by the end, Sokka's out here being like, what happened? And then Yue's like, Aang has now lost himself into the sea spirit being of the moon spirit who's angry and going to be looking into the sea for their partner forever. They are wrath manifest. And then off they go. I'm not even talking about the wooden acting yet. We'll get there. I'm just talking about the stylistic storytelling choices that were made that I came to a conclusion to by the time I reached the end of the series. Because in some places, I think there's room to defend it. I've seen a lot of people over-extrapolating and being angry at every single change made. I don't mind that Aang didn't have much of a battle on the first ship where he's captured. We gotta get out of there, we got places to be. I didn't even mind necessarily that Zhao didn't have an Agni Kai against Zuko early on, even though that does kind of highlight his character that he's willing to backstab Zuko with a very, unrespectful fire blast to the back at one point. But what they end up doing is repurposing that into one fight for the confrontation during this final fight. So they don't have to have two fights. Sure, fine, whatever. There's still kind of the backstabbery fire moment, but it's not as powerful, And to be fair, I don't think the live action series from anybody would ever really surpass the original cartoon, That is probably the greatest television show of all time. Kind of a high bar to exceed. Gosh, Avatar really has the highest high bar and the lowest low bar. It's incredible. Still, I was willing to meet in the middle. But then there's all sorts of other little details that do really irk me. How about the fact that the actual live action series establishes the fog of lost souls? Wow, that's really cool. I don't know if that was always a thing, but I remember it from Legend of Korra, where we will see later on in 100 years' time in the timeline's sake, Commander Zhao is taken there by the ocean spirit in the cartoon and is forever dealing with their own insanity, lost for eternity, and living in immortality that way. So we've established that there is a fog of souls, the trio gets stuck in it for a little bit, and then Zhao gets fire blasted into the water and then fades a little down. I mean, the water glows around him a little bit, but I wanted to, maybe it'll be a payoff later, but I wanted to see that more directly, We also see at the very, very end in a post-credits, the final act mission of Sozin's Comet, which, that's fine. I'm okay with that being a plot point later. I guess it's whatever. One of the biggest, awfulest changes in Book 1 Water is the fact that throughout this entire series, somehow, Aang does practically zero waterbending. It's to the point that he's the one that teaches Katara how to waterbend in the early stages. I get that there's an element of, oh, you can learn from me because I can bend it all. Here, it's the balance of push and pull. Do your arm into a circle and now you can do it. But this is the entire season 1 and he doesn't do it. Apart from when he is in the form of the spirit itself. When he's in a big water ball and he's just doing the kaiju punch moves to do a big kaiju punch. Now he's waterbending. This is such a misstep. And I think it's really emblematic of something, because the more I watched the first series and I saw how much they were taking from later elements, the more I thought to myself, this is making too many green flags to keep me appetized, to give me fan service, to keep me going, that it feels like this series is going to run out of its own steam because it's pushing so many things early on. By giving us so many fan service green flags early, it's setting itself up for all sorts of red flags later. Is this going to be more than 3 series now? Because now Aang's got to learn all of water, and then all of earth, and then all of fire, and it's going to be really clashed together. To be fair, on the other side of things, in Season 1, Aang does try a hint of firebending and then burns Katara. Not prevalent in the Netflix series, I don't mind it. I'm sure it will come out later as well, but it's like it's all mixing a little bit too much later, or at least that's how it feels, The fact that they brought in Azula and May and Ty Lee all together to have their own thing, it's a lot, just to keep us going. And it's a shame as well, because whilst visually this series looks pretty good, the CGI and the acting does as well really bring it down. I think this is one of those things that will hopefully naturally improve over time, kind of like the Harry Potter movies. These kids are pretty young. I did see in the trailer that Aang's delivery, especially for the speech when he's talking to Appa on the end of that bad night, is just really dryly sold. And I'm not entirely convinced that it's the actor's fault as well, because Sokka is exactly the same. In a lot of his jokes and a lot of his storytelling, he lingers so much in sarcasm and not at all on funny. And this whole series in general isn't funny, or at least it doesn't seem to be trying to be. And if it is, ugh. And I think that's a directing thing. They've gone for gritty and realism that they've lost the fun and the charm of this series in the first place. It needs to be a balance of both because this Avatar is literally 12. You can't just put entirely stress and anxiety onto this child. You need to showcase them as a child. Other than him at one time bumping into a statue while playing with kids on his air scooter. And even then, that was just a reference to the title scene, and the CGI on it looked naff. This is another point as well, right? The CGI in some places looks great. Appa, as a creature monster design, realized in a photorealistic sense, looks great. But so much of these other elements of CGI look naff. It's not as bad as Rock Pebble 2010 levels of CGI, but it's just like there's so much CGI background and blurred outlines on our actors, and it really showcases how green screened this series is and how that's quite a negative step for the series. What worked so well for, I was going to say One Punch Man then, for One Piece is the fact that they did have live action physical sets to play with. Now, to be fair, I reckon these giant wooden ships are a little bit cheaper than an actual metallic Fire Nation fleet. But all the same, I think something is lost there with just how much emphasis there is on fantasy CGI settings that make the world seem so much more hollow. Which is a real shame, but I guess just goes to show how great of a fantasy world Avatar is if even someone with the budget of Netflix can't keep up. At the end of the day, this Netflix series, at least season 1, seems to be placed in exactly the place it really should have always been expected to land in. It's not as good as the cartoon, it's better than the original movie, it is so evocatively mid. It has a lot of high points, some defendable points, and then just some total disasters. The fact that Aang doesn't waterbend is awful, but even just other elements, like you do have Azula and all of her friends involved, you also have all of the past 3 avatars involved already, and it seems so early, because like, are they gonna go further backwards so we can see someone new, or is it already too far gone because we know what Karuk looks like and is there, you know? I mean, I guess he's bluer than usual, but still. I really disliked, personally, how they handled the spirit of the face stealer, considering they didn't even establish much about him stealing faces, and then Aang's first conversation with him is entirely him doing expressive faces because he didn't know that setup. We even see the owl from the library already. It's too early for everything that it's gonna lose steam later. That's the best way I can see it. Other changes, like the fact that the lover's tunnel is made out of sibling love, that's fine, very Frozen, we you know, cool, whatever, what a change. The removal of Aang's romantic air around Katara, I'm also okay with. Clearly, that's a later plotline they want to brew with later. I guess that's fine. But really, this series isn't as good as its predecessor, but it never really could be. I'll probably continue to watch this series just for the sake of it. It looks visually nice in some places. It's nice to see some actual colourful costuming for once. And I adore the story anyway. It's literally my top 3 favourite TV shows. So it's got that going for it. But man, maybe the creators were right in really sticking to their guns and leaving the moment things got incredibly turned over. As at the end of the day, this is the most corporate, baby-feeding version of the story we really could have gotten. The bar was both very high and very low, which means there wasn't really a target where it could miss. Yeah, in either direction. For now, my name's been Daz. Thank you for making it to the very end. Let me know your thoughts on the series. Tell me some really small niche details and opinions you have about this series. Was there a really particular moment you wanted to really rumble about? I want to hear it. Tell me something niche, because we've all heard the Aang is flying one, you know? And I will see you in a little bit.